This is the second week of Tricycle's January online retreat. And last week we covered some general points about the 16 precepts and also about repentance as a ritual that can help in taking these precepts. This morning I want to take the first three of the 16 precepts, and these are commonly known as the three refuges, the three treasures, or the three jewels. In taking these precepts, we're really taking refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Those are the three jewels, or the three treasures. And to take refuge in them, really, it's not, for some people, the word refuge is not the best word. It almost sounds like you're running for cover, you're trying to escape the world and find some little sanctuary of religiosity. But it really means, taking refuge really means to place one's faith fully in. But first, let me just talk about them in a general sense. Taking these three refuges, and refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, is common to all the different schools of Buddhism, not just Zen, not just Mahayana Buddhism, but all the different schools. In fact, taking refuge in the three treasures, technically doing so, that the three refuges and the first five of the precepts, the 10 Cardinal Precepts, this is what constitutes a Buddhist in traditional terms. One who takes the three refuges and who observes or tries to uphold the five grave precepts. In some Buddhist countries, they have the custom of doing this on solemn occasions, such as the 1st and the 15th days of the lunar month, the new moon and full moon. And you can see it as a more or less formal way, an explicit way of recognizing that failure to uphold these three refuges, the three treasures, is a kind of a ceasing to be a Buddhist, kind of a being suspended, and that a fresh acceptance of these and a renewed commitment to them is required to be restored as part of the Buddha way. Here in Rochester, we do take the three refuges maybe 3 times a year, formally in a ceremony. The original word for refuge means protection or shelter or abode. I think refuge is the most common translation in English. Another way to understand it is I undertake to find my home in Buddha, and same with Dharma and Sangha. Now, it's very clear what we understand, what we mean by Buddha. Let's take the first one. The first of the three refuges, according to our translation, is I take refuge in Buddha and resolve that with all beings I will understand the great way whereby the Buddha seed may forever thrive. By Buddha, we use the word the Buddha. It refers to this historical personage, Shakyamuni Buddha, who lived in India 2,500 years ago. But just the word Buddha by itself means the awakened one, or to open it up a little more, it means awakened awareness. And in that regard, we're all Buddha. We all are equally endowed with this nature of Buddha, this Buddha nature, or true nature, or original nature, or essential mind, essential nature. These are all synonyms for this innate purity and enlightenment that we have never been without. So when we say, I take refuge in Buddha, we're really saying, I place my faith fully in my own Buddha nature. Not just the guy who lived in India, but I honor, I will find as my source of spiritual sustenance my own Buddha nature, my own enlightened nature. This makes it a really fundamental part of meditation practice. In a way, you could say that upholding this refuge, taking refuge in Buddha, means, just in the nuts and bolts work of meditation, it means I'm not taking my refuge in my thoughts, I'm taking my refuge in no thought, in that which is beyond the stuff of the mind. And this is hugely important in really getting a meditation practice off the ground and rolling, is to recognize that so long as we are dwelling in our thoughts, so long as we're trying to find some escape or some entertainment in our thoughts, which, by the way, when we come to practice, we've been doing that pretty much our whole life. So long as we're doing that, as taking refuge in our thoughts, we're going to be miserable, at least intermittently miserable. So taking refuge in Buddha means taking refuge in our own Buddha nature that is beyond the contents of our consciousness. This is a very profound commitment, and one that we all know from meditation experience. It's one that keeps getting away from us as we keep getting drawn into our thoughts. Another way of understanding this is by finding my home, my refuge in my Buddha nature, and also in Dharma and Sangha, I can liberate myself. It's a renewal of our devotion to the way of enlightenment, and enlightenment and practice, and to the ongoing work of developing compassion. Taking this refuge, we only reach completion with it when our understanding of Buddhism is complete, which another word for that is full enlightenment. So all of us are still working toward full enlightenment, and so these taking refuge is a way of fortifying that commitment and hastening our direction, our movement toward the awakening to this Buddha nature, our true nature. The second of the three refuges, I take refuge in Dharma and resolve that with all beings I will enter deeply into the sutra treasure, whereby my wisdom may grow as vast as the ocean. Dharma, I suppose most of you know, Dharma means the law or the teaching. It also, just another translation for it is the way, the Tao. So when we place our faith in the teaching, it goes beyond the teaching, it goes into the law of reality, then we are coming into harmony with reality, to the extent that we can live up to that commitment, that taking refuge in. May interest you. It did me when I found out recently that the word Buddhism is just a word that some Christian missionary came up with. I think in the 19th century, he went to Japan or China, and he saw people doing meditation and endeavoring to uphold the precepts, and he didn't know what to call it. They would certainly have used the word Dharma and all, but he saw the Buddha figures in the temples, and so he came up with this. He said, "What should I call it? Let's call it Buddhism." But for most of the 2,500 years of Buddhist history, it was just called the law. And what we're trying to do is to align ourselves with the natural order of things, with the way. In that statement, I take refuge in Dharma and resolve that with all beings I will enter deeply into the sutra treasure. Sutra, of course, means the scriptures, the purported words of Shakyamuni Buddha. But in Zen, the words of the Buddha are not the most important thing. It's the experience. It's the Buddha's experience of enlightenment that is what we want to grow into. And then the third of the three, I take refuge in Sangha. Sangha is really means the community. It's one of these foreign words, originally Sanskrit, that is so rich in meaning. The same as Dharma and Buddha, by the way. All three of these have such deep and rich meanings that no ordinary English word suffices. So as far as I know, in just about every American Western Buddhist community, we retain this word Sangha. Originally, Sangha meant the order of monks. But over the centuries, well, certainly now, in the 20th century and 21st century in the West, when there are virtually no monks in the traditional sense, taking vows of celibacy, really Sangha more broadly means anyone who takes refuge in the three treasures and tries to live up to them. But we can even go beyond that. I would submit that Sangha can be understood more broadly as anyone in any spiritual tradition, any religion, who is sincerely working to overcome this basic selfishness of humanity. In that sense, we can, or anyone who is working sincerely on herself or himself to overcome the problems in their own character and personality. So it's a broader and more inclusive way to understand Sangha. But originally it meant anyone who is practicing. I would say perhaps anyone who is on doing this online retreat is part of the Sangha. So, taking refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha really means it's a way to find liberation from the round of ceaseless grasping and desiring something more. Last week, in last week's talk, I mentioned we're up against, we human beings are in this predicament that so long as we rely on worldly gains or worldly happiness, we will be left dissatisfied. Taking refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha really means going beyond that and finding liberation from this baying hound of desire, this ceaseless grasping for something more. And but don't take my word for it. You can confirm this through your own practice of meditation. I'm going to go right on now after taking these. And these, by the way, taking the three refuges, these are really considered the most important, I believe, generally considered the most important of these 16 precepts, is taking the refuge in these, and Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. The old texts say that the great Japanese Zen master Dogen, in his death room, where he was soon to die, he circled around a pillar He wrote Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha on a pillar in his room, and then walked around taking refuge in these three, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. So it's not just some tradition. All of these great enlightened masters, women and men both, have taken heart and committed themselves to these three. Now the next three of the 16 precepts, after those, are what are called the three general resolutions. This is, I resolve to avoid evil, I resolve to do good, and I resolve to liberate all sentient beings. Really, what these three summarize what the subsequent 10 Cardinal Precepts go into in more detail. The first two are sort of two sides of the same coin, a resolve to avoid evil. To be frank, I'm not comfortable with this word evil, even though we know that there are plenty of people in the world who we can say commit terrible evil things. But there's something about the word evil that strikes me as too much to refer to it that way. But still, this is the traditional translation, and I tend to be more conservative about these things and to keep that wording. But to resolve to avoid evil is the other side of the coin from my resolve to do good. So first, I resolve to avoid evil. Each of the 10 Cardinal Precepts are articulated first in what you resolve not to do. So for example, the first one, I resolve not to kill, and then followed by, in the second part of the precept, but to cherish all life. And this reflects the avoiding evil and the doing good in each of the 10 Cardinal Precepts. The first one, I resolve to avoid evil, fundamentally means not to be deceived by the notion of separation. From a Zen perspective, maybe from a wider Buddhist perspective, the root source of harm, causing harm, of evil, if you will, the root source is the illusion of separateness, of believing that that other person or those other people, however you construct it in your mind, that race, that ethnic group, that country, that other religion, by the way, there's been more blood and tears shed in the name of religion than anything, I'm convinced. It's believing that the other, so-called other, is somehow fundamentally separate from oneself. This is what enables us to perpetrate evil. And it's an illusion. Of course, there are differences. Every two individuals are different. Everyone watching this video is different from everyone else. And that's wonderful. We're all different. But we're not separate. We're not separate. We're not fragmented. That within our differences, there is this unity. There is this underlying indivisibility. And that's what meditation reveals experientially. It's not just believing it, but really confirming through direct experience that in Zen, that's what direct experience means. It means meditation, and not just sitting meditation, but confirming through direct experience, not just belief about what we read and hear, but through our own meditation, confirming that behind the divisible, there is always something indivisible. Behind the disputable, there is always something indisputable. Those are the words of Confucius. That there's this other aspect to reality besides the world of different phenomena that we move through every day, that within those differences there is this oneness. And that confirming that oneness, especially through awakening, but even short of that, through deeper meditation experiences, is what begins to free us from this illusion of separation, of divisions, in either individually or collectively. In early Buddhism, the ordinary unenlightened person is called puttejnana, something like that, which literally means separate people, people who believe they're separate from others. Yasutani Roshi, my Dharma grandfather, Roshi Kaplo's teacher, Japanese teacher, once said that, compared this first, resolving to avoid evil, as the sword that slays. This is the work of meditation, is to slay, or to rather to see through this notion, this deep concept of separateness. The second of the three resolutions, I resolve to do good. Yasutani Roshi calls this the sword that revives. This is the opposite of the first, which is, this one is acting out of the understanding that all existences are fundamentally indivisible. Or another way to see this, the resolution to do good is to live up to to get beyond greed, anger, and delusion. Remember, that was from, in my first week's talk, that greed, anger, and delusion is what is in the repentance ritual. We say a resolve to avoid, resolve to get beyond greed, anger, and delusion. These are considered the three poisons in Buddhism, not just Zen, but in all kinds of Buddhism, the three poisons with which we all are to some degree afflicted, even from birth, in a way. So I resolve to do good. And then the third of the three resolutions is I resolve to liberate all sentient beings. This is, Yasutani Roshi called this third the manifestation of the mind of compassion. I often have had students, especially beginners, say, how can I resolve to liberate all sentient beings when I haven't even liberated myself? I haven't come to awakening myself. I appreciate Aitken Roshi's, the late Robert Aitken Roshi, his take on this, where he saw this as liberating means to include. When you to see all beings as oneself is, in a very profound way, to liberate all beings. Well, we've arrived at the doorstep of what we call the 10 Cardinal Precepts, which just further articulate these three general resolutions. So I'll end here, and we'll continue next week's talk.